So last year I made a video about getting better at patching in VCV rack, and it was mostly about habits, so patching every day, setting limitations and so on, basically ways of spending more time in the environment and learning faster. And now, after another year with VCV rack and modular, I want to share a few mindset shifts that might help you enjoy VCV even more and also help with patching in general. These are things that are great for beginners, but not only, so if you are past the beginner stage but still feel a bit lost sometimes, I think this video might help you. And the first tip is about what happens before you even place the first module. This is all about intention, so before you even add any modules, try and answer a very simple question. So what is this patch supposed to be? Not how it works, nor how complex it should be, but what role it plays musically. For example, I build many patches for showcasing modules or techniques in my videos, so I often have an idea of the purpose behind the patches, again if it's exploring a certain functionality or demonstrating a patch idea. I know even before I start the basic idea of the patch, and it makes it easier for me to stay focused and patch with intention. For example, I have a video about the VCV plug module, so I know that this will be my main voice and I would like to use it for as many sounds as I could, really exploring the different features and trying to experiment with various patching ideas and implement them with this module. Another idea is to decide that the patch you will build will serve a certain need in a bigger patch that you are working on, for example, concentrating on building a bass voice. So you know before you even start that this is the purpose of this patch, and you can focus and concentrate, and you have something to grab onto instead of spending hours figuring out what the patch should become, which brings me to another important point, and that's what would you consider a successful patch. So when would you consider a patch as a working patch, as a patch you're happy with? And again, starting off with an idea even before starting to patch and adding modules will really help you to get an idea of what a working patch should look and sound like, and this will help you avoid endless tweaking and frustration of stumbling in the dark and waiting for something interesting to happen. At some point, even though your patches might look different from one another, you will start seeing similar patterns of how you patch things, and this might be a good point to look out for systems in your patches rather than individual modules or connections. This will make things easier to reconstruct, explore more deeply, and it's especially useful for practicing. For example, control systems are the set of modules that control timing like clocks or logic, even sequencers. Voice systems are the actual modules that make and process sound, and modulation systems are the ones that add movement and variation to the sound, the timing, and really anything else inside your patch. And again, thinking in terms of systems might help you recognize aspects you like in your patch and then reconstruct them and use them in other patches. Might also make your patches much clearer and easy to go back to later on. And most importantly, this is great for practicing because instead of concentrating on specific modules and asking yourselves which modules are missing, you can simply think of whole systems that might be missing in your patches, or even try and replace whole systems and seeing if things work better. This is something I mentioned also last year, and it's way too important to skip. Basically using the same few modules in different ways, learning their strengths and where they shine, and this will very much help you to build confidence and speed. But I always say limitations are a doorway to creativity. For example, you can experiment for days with a filter, exploring audio rate modulation. You can use it to process modulation, use it as a voice or modulation source, use it to create drum voices, feedback patching, and much more. And really see which ideas you like, where this specific filter shines, which will give you more confidence to use it in your future patches. And you will develop speed because you already know what it can give you, and you will spend more time having fun creating music or sounds instead of stumbling in the dark. And again, this will work also with other modules. You can use sequencers as oscillators as modulation sources. You can use delay modules for carpless strong or physical modeling, and modulation as sequencers for generating pitch information. So really try and spend more time with a handful of modules, exploring their strengths and ways of using them that were not intended but still very much useful in various patches. Something that can cause a lot of unnecessary frustration is expecting every patch to do everything. Learning to patch and music making are different activities, and treating them as the same thing can make both harder than they need to be. If you will not make this separation, there's a chance that you will judge yourself for no reason when your patches don't sound good, even though you just wanted to experiment with something, and then you will experiment less often because you're afraid to ruin the music. You will also find yourselves endlessly tweaking things to try and make the patch sound better without really understanding what you're doing because of the pressure of making things sound good. And at the end you will feel like your music is not good enough and that you're not making any progress, you're stuck at a certain level. And that's why, in my opinion, this is the most important tip of them all. So what to do? Well, first of all, make a clear statement before you start. And that's what I mentioned in the beginning, patching with intention, that you now practice. Just like a pianist will practice scales, you will practice patching. Try concentrating on small patches, or what I like to call patchlets, and these patchlets are disposable, so no need to save them, and you should focus on one idea or module. So ask yourself something like, what if, or what will happen when I do this or do that, or how does a specific module work? And all this without the pressure of sounding good or having something to work on later on. It can be as messy as you want, so no need for labeling things, no need for color coding cables and a clean signal chain. So even if it sounds terrible but you learned something, it was a success. Now when you do decide to sit down and work on music or building a complete patch, try to be more selective when it comes to choosing modules and techniques to use. You already know from the practice sessions which modules you like more, where they shine, and the techniques that you found interesting. Try also to limit yourselves when it comes to experimentation, and I don't mean not to experiment at all, that's the whole fun of making music with modular and in general, but try to limit yourselves and set boundaries, so save often, create copies of the patch before you change things, and try muting things instead of deleting them completely, and also limit the number of modules you don't really understand or didn't have enough time to explore. When making music, you don't want to think about how does a module work, you want to be able to have enough mental energy to really listen. And again, in my opinion, this is the most important tip in this video since it helps a lot mentally and removes self-judgment. It gives room for curiosity and it prevents burnout and frustration. Now this next tip might be the hardest thing to do, and I get this asked all the time. Not knowing how to start a patch is already tough, but not knowing when to stop can be just as limiting and frustrating. And this is actually true also when it comes to music making in general, not just in modular, and even when it comes to other art forms like painting and writing. But try to remember one thing when it comes to patching is that a patch doesn't need to be finished, it just needs to be complete in some way. Now there are many reasons why we don't want to finish a patch or a piece of music. So for example, we get attached to it emotionally and we don't want to let go. If it's because we don't want to lose it and all the work we put into it, or we think this is our best work and we are sure that the next patch will not be as good. Also, sometimes we think that it's one tweak away from being perfect, and it's usually never the case. So there are a few things you can look out for which will let you know that it's a good time to move on. So for example, if you follow the previous tip and you build a practice patch, you might notice that you learned a technique or a module and you understand what's going on, so it's a good time to stop and move on. Or you notice that you're repeating the same technique over and over and it became a chore instead of being exciting. And if you find yourselves just tweaking things without asking yourselves why, it might also be a good time to stop and move on, and definitely consider this as a successful practice session. And this is true also for music patches. If you feel like the patch is doing its thing, it sounds okay, but it stopped being interesting, or you find yourselves working on details without the joy of polishing them, and you listen less and tweak more, it might be a good time to save it and move on. The same if you feel like everything you try just makes things worse, or that things lose their structure quickly and you're unsure what to do or even afraid to touch it, consider stopping to work on it and avoid burnout. And there are multiple ways you can stop working on a patch, so stopping doesn't mean to just go ahead and delete everything, that's definitely not the point, and it's more destructive than productive. You can save the patch with a good title like Modulation Idea, Bass Voice, Generative in G minor, or Techno Patch, 130 BPM, D Dorian, Missing Bass. That way you can always go back to it after giving it some time and you know more or less what it's about. Another thing you can try is recording the patch or sound not too long, just 10 to 30 seconds, and listen back to it later on without looking at the patch. This is something I always did even before starting with modular, just concentrating on listening without looking at the screen, and it was always helpful in terms of understanding the sound and flow of the music. Another idea is to leave yourself sorts of breadcrumbs to find your way back into the patch. So the file name is of course important, but you can also leave some notes in the notes module, so what you want to work on more, what is missing, what you wish the patch will do. And also try as much as you can to organize your patches. So for example, have a folder for each month and store your patches there with as clear file name as possible, so you preserve progress, you reduce the fear of losing something, you create closure, and you free mental space for the next patch. You can even have a ritual to help you stop and move on, so write in the notes module or a notebook why you are stopping, then save either the thing you like most as a selection or preset or the whole patch. Try and record a bit of the patch or sound so you can listen to it in the future, and then close the patch. So try and start patching with intention, know what you're after, try thinking in systems instead of individual modules, and definitely have separate sessions for practicing and music making. Try exploring individual modules fully before moving on. This will help you to know when to stop and move on, which will prevent frustration and will allow you to enjoy patching and exploring ideas. And that was it actually. I really hope that this was somewhat helpful. Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments if you have any more tips, and I wish you many hours of fun patching and happy accidents in 2026. Cheers!